Let me welcome you. This is the monthly economic update that we've been doing now for a couple of years. It's getting larger, it's getting a bit more attention. The circulation of the video, which is being made by Brian Issam in the back, who works with me, does really now circulate globally. I mean, the number of websites around the world that take it off of our website, where it'll go within the next couple days, is extraordinary, the way the internet is. So we are really circulating on a global scale. It's remarkable, the emails that I get about this thing, and if we're a day or two late, the angry emails wanting to know where is it and all the rest. And there are now a number of countries where it is being produced with subtitles so that you actually see it in English, but there are Greek, Bengali, and other subtitled versions of it. So it's very pleasing and very flattering, and I'm much obliged by all of it. I should also make two or three little announcements that might be of interest to you. Over this year, 2013, I have been on more television and radio programs than ever before, and so there's a growing interest in what we're doing that is, frankly, a little overwhelming in terms of what my schedule allows, given the fact that I'm actually older than 21, and so it's a little harder for me to do all these things. I want to thank not only the Brecht Forum, which in the middle of a very difficult move from Manhattan to Brooklyn, I'm sure many of you know about it, still had the time to do the work to produce this evening and to make the arrangements. I'm also appreciative to the New School for its interest in becoming a sponsor of all of this. That's another part of the way in which a set of ideas and a perspective that used to be out of the allowable range of discourse is coming back into the allowable range of discourse. And that says more about American history than anything I'm going to tell you this evening, and is something for you all to think of, as is the flow of invitations that I get now and that are remarkable, considering where they're coming from. I also wanted to let you know that the websites, these two, rdwolff.com and democracyatwork.info, are where all of the work that I do and the people I work with do are posted. All of that is available to you free of charge all the time. But if you're interested in any of this kind of stuff and the analysis you get here, the best possible places to go are either or both of those websites. And I just want to make sure you are made aware of this. The weekly radio program, which by the way has the same name, Economic Update, is also continuing. Here in New York, it continues to be broadcast on WBAI every Saturday at noon, but it is probably going to be moved to a different time, probably a weekday, and probably during the evening rush hour. So there will be a change then, and as soon as that happens, I will let you know. We are now also broadcast in about 15 other markets in the United States on a weekly basis. Those include Los Angeles, Houston, Tampa, San Francisco, Sacramento, Peoria, Illinois, Syracuse, New York, and some others that I don't even remember. And that is growing as well. We're hopeful that Santa Fe, New Mexico will be added soon. And we continue to be interested, if any of you have connections with public radio or community radio stations anywhere in the United States that you think might be interested in carrying this program, please let them know or connect them to us. The truthout.org organization, some of you know, that's a dispenser of analysis. They send to their several 100,000 member mailing list every weekly radio program. The audio version is sent out to them. So in addition to the radio, we have that. Also, the Progressive Radio Network, Gary Null's system, also broadcasts our radio station. So we are able to get this kind of analysis out on a basis that's very pleasing to us. And finally, we are getting close to beginning to make available a video version of the radio program. In other words, we have now been making essentially television programs out of the radio program. That, some of you will enjoy noticing, puts me in the same position as Rush Limbaugh. He also makes a video. His TV program is basically the video broadcast of him doing his radio program. So I thought, what better model for me to follow than to do that as well. And so we're beginning to figure out how to get that out. And so we'll have this stuff out in video as well as. It's very clear that the reason all of this is happening is not about the content of what I'm doing, because that isn't much different from the content I did 5, 10, and 15 years ago. What is happening is that the audience in the United States is interested. And that's actually much better news than if it were me. And so I wanted to share with you that this is really a remarkable sign of things that are changing in the United States in ways that might surprise you. It is possible that I will also be on a couple of major television programs that most of you know about, but they asked me not to discuss it until it becomes a reality, so as soon as it does, I will tell you. I can also tell you that having been on the program with Bill Moyers several times this year, that has had an enormous effect on my ability to function in the United States. Nothing makes you so real in this culture as being on the television. It's a sobering lesson for me. You can speak this way for 30 years and nobody ever heard of you. You go on Bill Moyers one day and suddenly you seem to be everywhere, and remarkable. Okay, so let's turn then with me, and thank you all for coming, and do some, as we normally do, short little things in the beginning, economic updates of things that have happened over the last month that I think might be of special interest to you, either that you didn't see or hear about, or that you didn't see or hear about in the way I'm going to present it to you. So let's begin. If you recall, some of you, those that were with us back in September, that I made a big point then of explaining that the so-called recovery wasn't. In other words, that the economic system we're in hasn't recovered. A small section of it has recovered. So it is not true to say there's no recovery at all. But it is also not true to say that there's a general recovery, because the recovery is limited to the stock market, to big corporate profits, and to the top wealth distribution of our society. And I always like it if sometime after I have made this point, some major media makes the point too, because then I can bring it to your attention and remind you that I'm not a weirdo who's out there all by himself saying something. So imagine my surprise when in the October 14th issue, I understand we're not quite there yet, but you know how magazines are. This is Time magazine, the latest one, whose date is October 14th. And there's a woman in there named Rana Foroohar, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, who has a fairly regular column, maybe in each issue of Time magazine. And by the way, for those of you that have not looked at Time magazine for a long time, and given what it was, this is a perfectly reasonable human response, not to look at it, and who used to imagine that Newsweek was the better of the two, they have had a role reversal. Time magazine now does what Newsweek used to, and Newsweek does what Time used to. So Time magazine will surprise you in what you can find in there. And so I was struck when this story carried, for example, the following line. The divide between stocks and the real economy tells us some important things. For starters, the foundations of our recovery are weak. These are her writings. Equities have remained relatively strong because the Federal Reserve is artificially propping them up. But the reality for most people is that the recovery is weak and narrow at best. Whoa, whoa. And she gives two statistics, which I wanted to share with you, that undergird her sense of the recovery affecting a very small slice of the United States, while the reality for most people is no recovery at all. First, it's the number of people that are underemployed. And here's the number she gives, which I thought was stunning. The most discussion of recovery has been in the last 12 months, the period from August 2012 through August 2013. And here's the statistic she finds meaningful. Only 43.7% of adults had full-time jobs in August. And that's down from 45% of adults in August of 2012. That's a significant statistical decline in the number of Americans with a full-time job over the last 12 months when we're supposed to have had a recovery. And when she asks herself, why is it that the recovery is so weak for the mass of people, she comes up with another interesting statistic. And this has to do with a calculation called the average daily consumer spending. That means how much money, this may surprise you, the average American consumer spends a day on everything from food, clothing, shelter, transportation, everything put together. In September of 2008, arguably about the worst it got, or close to the worst it got in this great downturn, average spending per day of the American people, $113. Average spending per day. Of course, you know, that averages out when you buy a car for thousands or something else, so it's everything. So what is it 5 years later, in September of 2013, just last month? Is it $113 as it was at the depths of the Depression, or have we recovered? Answer, average daily spending last month, $86. From $113 at the worst, down significantly, 20% less. If the average American isn't spending money the way they did in the worst of the Depression, then we're not going to have a recovery, because the recovery depends on people buying goods and services, thereby creating demand and job opportunities and all the rest. Anyway, if you're interested in this, get the latest issue. It's the one that's available now, Time Magazine, and the column by Rana Foruhar, I believe a Persian name, and that she writes in that paper. I've been advised by several of you, and I'm about to show you that I shouldn't only have bad news or depressing news or the news that kind of makes you feel as though maybe you shouldn't have come here this evening. Since you have enough bad news in your life, you don't want any more. And I appreciate that. I understand that. And it leads me to remind you, as you know, sometimes I say that I am not responsible for any of what I tell you about. I wish I had such power. I don't. And therefore, I beg you please to remember that if I'm just the messenger, the rule is don't shoot the messenger if you don't like the message. Okay, so bear with me. But since I know some people are tempted, here is some good news for you, okay? This has to do with a little country in the middle of Europe you've all heard about called Switzerland. And the Swiss people, all 8 million of them, that's the population of Switzerland, about what New York City is, all 8 million people in Switzerland have a remarkable society, not only because of the lovely mountains and the watches and the chocolate, wonderful as those things are, and that about exhausts their economy anyway. The remarkable thing is they have a kind of democracy that we in America might, I don't know, imagine to be, dare we say it, a touch more advanced than our own. One of the things that you can do in Switzerland is the following. If you can get 100,000 signatures, that's a lot of signatures, but if you can get 100,000 signatures in a population of 8 million, you can put anything on an immediate referendum that all the citizens of the country get to vote on. You don't have to go through the Congress of the country or the parliament or the leadership, none of it. 100,000 people sign something, it's on the ballot, and all of the country gets to vote. And I thought you might be interested in the two exciting new votes. One, they've already gotten the signatures, so the date of the vote will be the 24th of November. And the other one, they're confident they're going to get the signatures, and it'll be on the ballot within a few weeks after that. By the way, you don't have to wait a long time. It's within weeks of submitting the valid signatures, the referendum happens. Okay. So here's the first one where the vote will be on the 24th of November. This ballot initiative says that there will be a legal maximum difference between the highest payment an executive of a company can get and the lowest. The law will establish a maximum and a minimum. And the maximum will be 12 times the minimum. Now, just for a reference, what is the average CEO of a major American corporation? Take the top 2,000 corporations in America who do the bulk of the business. What is the ratio on average between the top CEO and the lowest paid worker? It's in the range of 350 to 400 times. So let me do that again. The ratio of the big corporation, top to the bottom, is 350, roughly. And the Swiss voters have announced that they're going to have a referendum on the 24th. And if the people who are very angry in Switzerland, by the way, all the polls show what the issue is. They are grossed out, the Swiss people are, by the revelations of what top executives get. By the way, their top executives are not paid as well as top executives in the United States. But, you know, they're not Swiss, the Americans either. The Swiss are concerned about the Swiss, and they're not happy to find out how much money they're getting. They're very upset. That's where the impetus comes for signing the petitions. So angry people about the wealth of the tiny number got out and stood in front of supermarkets and so forth and collected signatures and collected 100,000 in a few weeks. Went quickly. No problem at all. 1 to 12 rather than 1 to 350. Leading corporate executives in Switzerland are making what I think is a terrible tactical mistake and threatening to leave the country if this law passes because they want to hold on to their income, setting the stage for a much more sharp conflict in a country that normally has a piece of cheese. Okay, second, I have relatives in Switzerland, so I'm above reproach for what I said. Second ballot initiative, which is nearing completion and will definitely do it. And I think this one will strike you all as even more interesting. Not only were the Swiss angry at how much the wealthy got, but they were horrified to discover the significant number of Swiss people who don't get enough, the other end. So this petition, about which there will be a referendum, says the following. If this passes, every adult in Switzerland will be given 2,500 euros a month under any and all circumstances for their entire life. That's the equivalent of $2,800 a month. Do the arithmetic. You ready? 30 grand, better than 30 grand a year, will become the basic minimum guaranteed income for all Swiss adults. Two-parent family means you start at $66,000 a year, two adults living together. I thought I'd let that sink in for a minute. That's Switzerland, not some communist country far away or something like that. It's Switzerland. Solid, stolid, bourgeois Switzerland. Right? It's the sturdy burghers of Zurich and Bern and Geneva and all of that. That's a reaction of one country's population to the horrified learning of how the gap between rich and poor has become outrageous. And they're taking steps to reduce the income at the top and raise the income at the bottom. A nation committed to a national debate and a vote on an egalitarian change. Pause.
You said
Yep. It's a guaranteed minimum, whether you work or not.
Is there a time limit on it, for example, before you re-engage in the work?
My guess is those details haven't been worked out, that this is a kind of a referendum that makes a basic commitment and then the details will be worked out. But I'm not sure. I haven't read the thing myself, so I don't know. But I'm sure if you do some work with your computer, check up Switzerland, you'll certainly hear about it because it is very big news in Switzerland. My story is taken from an article by Reuters News Service dated October 4th, so from Bern, Switzerland. But I'm sure you'll get plenty of other sources of all of this. Okay. Let me turn then to the hot item in the news that, of course, I assume many of you, since you've communicated this to me, would like me to say something about. And I want to, but I want to throw one more statistic at you because it sets the tone and it follows nicely after the story of Switzerland. Okay, a recent statistical job that I've actually reported to you on before by what are the two really leading global specialists on the inequality of wealth and income in the United States. Two economists, one named Saez and the other one named Piketty. Piketty is a professor in Paris, in France, and Saez is a professor at University of California in Berkeley. And they collaborate. They have a website you can go to where you get all the latest statistics of their ongoing research. And they've done a research recently that has led to a number of people doing calculations. And the one I want to talk to you about, and I give you the citation because if some of you are interested, you can follow this up yourself. The work was done by a person named Colin Gordon, G-O-R-D-O-N. And if you look up the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, epi.org, you can get his work, and you can see there all the statistics that go into it. I'm just going to give you the results. And here's what they did. They looked at the growth in income of Americans at all different levels of income over the whole period from 1979 to 2012. Adjusting it for prices, so this is the growth in what you can really afford to buy with your income. And they asked first, how did the lowest 20% of Americans do? The lowest 20% of households, families, how did they do when you looked at how much they earned, adjusted for the prices they had to pay, how'd they do? And over the years, from 1979, over 30 years, really the last 30 years of our country's, their income dropped by 12.1%. The real value of the bottom 20%, they really took it hard. They lost. What about the next 20%? The people who are not the 20% poorest, but are in the next range. They're wealthier than the bottom 20%, but not wealthier than the 40 from the count above. They didn't do badly. They kind of stayed the same. They dropped a tiny bit. So now we got 40% of the people who either dropped or stayed the same. The next quintile, the next fifth of our population, those who are literally in the middle of the distribution, the 40 to 60%, these are the people who earn more than the bottom 40%, but less than the top 40%. They're right in the middle. They increased by 8.4%. You know, over 35 years, this isn't spectacular, to say the least. And I'm going to come back, and you're going to see it's a lot worse than not spectacular. But now, that's sort of the bad news, right? It really means that the bottom 60% averaged loss. When you average all three of these together, it's a loss. The majority of people over the last 30-some years actually lost the income in terms of what they could afford to buy with it. It's a lost generation for them. Not only no growth, but they lost. But now the good news. See, I'm bringing you good news. Here comes the good news. Stay with me. The people who are richer than the bottom 60%, but not as rich as the top 20%, this group, they did pretty well. Right? 20% increase. It's not 1% a year, it's less than that, but it's something. It's not much, but something. And now we get to the top 20%. Hey, they improved 48%. I mean, half again as much in 2012 they could afford with their income than they could back in 1970 again. Not half again as much, up almost 50%. But now we get to the top 5%. Whoa, they more than doubled their income. And then we get to the top 1%. They almost tripled their income. And then we get to the top 1/10 of 1%. Their income went up 4 times. And then the winner, the group you all are, those particularly that are young and here as students at the new school, you're here in order to get that degree which you hope will catapult you into this group. And you know why you want to be here, because, wow, their income rose 7 times over the same period. The top 1/100th% saw their income go up 7 times, while the bottom 20% dropped 12%. This is, to use a simple term, a stupefying inequality. There really is no other way to describe this. This is about as far from an equal improvement over the last 30 years as you could get. It basically says the poorer you are, the worse this system screws you. And the richer you are, the more rich you will become. Or, as it says in the good book, to them that have shall be given, and from them who have not, even from them something will be taken. That's a paraphrase, but you get the idea. Okay? Now let me tell you what these numbers tell you that's even more astonishing. Over this period, American households changed dramatically. The single most important change was the addition of a second adult to the income-earning part of the family. This is the period when adult women, by the millions, moved into the paid labor force. They weren't there then, and they are there now. Which means that when you measure what happened to each group, you got to remember to take into account that there were more people, typically double the number of people working. Namely, the wife had joined the husband to work. If you think about it that way, that these are households that were twice as busy working as before, then these numbers are worse than you could imagine, because it means that the majority of people didn't do very well, even though the spouse was now working a part-time or full-time job. When you take that into account, this is a very sad number. And it explains a great deal about American politics. Because the majority of people, no matter how they are affected by the media, no matter how much wishful thinking they engage in, no matter how much they console one another, and we all do that, there's a relentless experience over the last 35 years. You're not getting anywhere economically. You can't make it. You're sinking into debt. You're having to forego things. You're having to diddle around with your income tax to avoid you're having to do more and more things that somewhere you wish you did not have to. And you're angry, and you're upset, and you're looking for explanations for why this is happening to you, why you're living in a society so staggeringly different. The rich got unspeakably richer. These numbers are more extreme than in almost, or maybe even every country on earth. I don't know, I haven't done the comparison, but I can assure you we are way at one end of the story in this level of inequality. And it also means, politically, something very simple, and yet missed so often. What do you think happens in a society where the top 5%, let's use that one, 5%, everybody in the top 5% either doubles their income over these 35 years or much more than that. Clearly, this top 5% is becoming more and more aware, whatever they tell themselves, that they're rich in comparison with everybody else. Now, there's a problem in a society like ours if a tiny number of people become so staggeringly rich relative to everybody else. And that problem is our voting system, our political system. The voting system says everybody gets a vote. One person, one vote. At least, sort of. That's how it works. So there's going to be a temptation. You don't need an advanced course in political science, something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy anyway, but you don't need it, to understand that if these people aren't stupid, they're going to understand they have a political problem coming. Because they're going to understand that for the mass of people, it's going to somehow percolate into their brains, you know something? The 95% who aren't doing well, we are the vast majority of the voters. Which means if we vote together, we could use the political system to undo the effects of the economic system. That's what it means if you give everybody a vote, which is why through history people who are wealthy have tried to prevent all that. Okay? So these folks at the top, they understood that it's the dialectic we used to call it, the very success they have in the economy vulnerabilizes them politically. And they got to do something about that. And what do? You try to use your wealth to negate the political risk of a voting system. And the way you do that is to control the political party, the political candidate, the whole procedure by making an election a matter of money, which is your relative strength, rather than anything else, which is the other side's relative strength, numbers. So if you're wondering, why is it that politics has become such a moneyed activity? This has nothing to do with greed, human nature, any of the other crap. This is a result of this. The only way those folks are going to hold on to an inequality of this sort is if they neutralize the danger from politics. They have to render politics something that the mass of people are, this is going to suggest something to you, they have to render politics something the mass of people can't get at because they don't have the money. They have to render politics something people are disgusted by, revolted by, throw up their hands and say these are all a bunch of whatever is necessary not to enable the mass of people to use their numbers to neutralize this outcome. Every time you say, which I understand of course, those clowns in Washington, you're doing what's hoped for. Look at them as clowns, look at them as idiots, look at them as crooks. It really doesn't matter. Don't take it seriously, turn away from it. Do not engage this at the same time that you complain that you have no power. You actually don't exploit the power you have. And I'm not making an argument for electoral politics. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not. But you do have to understand they are worried about your acting politically, even if you're not interested in it. They're worried you might. And they therefore have to neutralize the political system. You may think it's very dangerous to be deadlocked in what? Not for them. Fine. Nothing happens. Nothing is a lot better than what might happen. So they'll go with nothing. That's a product of this arrangement. And so far, it's working real well. So too is the fact that this kind of statistic is something which your faces are giving you away now you haven't seen before, which is one of the reasons I put it up here. But I really want you to have this in your mind as we go through the rest of what we're going to cover this evening. You can get these numbers at this website. inequality.org, if you're interested, or at the EPI.org. And again, the name of the man who did the work, Colin Gordon, and it's all available for you there. Okay. Now let's turn, with all this as background, to the issue many of you asked me to talk about, which is the government shutdown, the debt ceiling, and all of that stuff that's in the news. Okay, and this is a bit of a primer, so bear with me, but it's something that most Americans do not seem to understand real well. First, there has to be a government budget that is passed by the Congress and signed by the President. It's how we work as a nation. And that has to be basically done by the House of Representatives and then signed by the President and so on. So we have a government in which the Democratic Party controls the White House and the Senate, and the Republican Party controls the House. So you're going to have the kinds of shenanigans and bargaining that go with that kind of a split that has happened many times in American history and is not unique or unusual. So the first thing that happened as of October 1st was the refusal of the Republican House of Representatives to approve the spending part of the budget of the United States because, in the Republican view, there's too much spending, we're going to come back to that, and not enough taxes to pay for it. And so the government, whenever it spends more than it raises in taxes, has to borrow the deficit, the difference. And the amount of borrowing the government does a year is called the deficit. That's the difference between what it spends and what it takes in. And remember, the same Congress that is objecting is the Congress that agreed to that amount of spending and agreed to that amount of taxes. So no one is surprised that there's a gap. They voted for the numbers that make that a gap. It's like you deciding to spend $100 tomorrow, but to only take in $80, and then explain you're shocked out of your mind that you're down 20 bucks. You couldn't possibly be that stupid, and the people in Congress aren't either. So this is a game. They refuse to vote, then the government can't spend. And that's the Republican program, to refuse to spend and to position themselves as saving the American people from the awful burden of the borrowing that would have to be done if that amount of spending were to happen. That's their argument. That's what they say. So as of October 1st, the government can't spend sizable amounts of money it thought it could. What the Republicans have said is that they're willing to cut a deal if they cancel, at least for a year, the Obamacare medical insurance program. By the way, the bill to do that was already passed by the Congress, including the Republicans. It's been voted and passed. But under the way the United States works politically, other countries do not do this, but we do. After you pass a bill to do something, it's a separate bill that provides the money to do what you've just voted to do. So this allows congressmen and women to do something extraordinary. They can vote for a bill and then against what's called the appropriation to make it possible. Why would they want to do that? When they run for election, they can tell the people who wanted the bill, I voted for it. And they can tell the people who didn't want the bill, I didn't vote for the appropriation. Don't look at me, this is your country. This works a lot. So be careful. The next time you see an advertisement, I voted for, the same guy who's telling you how he voted for, voted against the appropriation or vice versa. This is just a convenience that helps to explain why an incumbent in the United States has 1,000 times better chance of being elected than someone who isn't an incumbent, because the incumbent has been able to play this game God knows how many times. So the first thing that happened on October 1st is the cut in spending because the government is not authorized to go ahead and spend. The Democrats answered, this is outrageous. We already passed this health care bill. You have no business undoing what we have already passed as a parliamentary body. And Obama refuses, he says, to negotiate about that. So there's a stalemate. But the Republicans are helped by a stalemate because the spending can't go forward if there isn't a vote to do it. That, however, is still allowing the government, because it has all kinds of discretion playing games with budgets, to basically keep going. Most of what the government was doing, it's still doing. Things are a little bit different with the second and completely separate question. And that question is the one that comes due on the 17th of this month, in about a week or so. That's called the debt ceiling. And let me make sure you all understand what that is. In the United States, again, unlike many countries, in the United States, we allow the government, the Congress, to decide year in and year out, as they do, this year we're going to spend $3 trillion on everything from the military to Social Security, everything. And we're going to levy taxes that bring in 2. Okay, you ready? This is tough arithmetic now. We're going to spend 3, and we're going to raise 2. You might have guessed there's a problem here someplace. How do you spend 3 if you only raise 2? Answer, you borrow the other one. You borrow $1 trillion, you add that to the $2 trillion you raise in taxes, bingo, you've got the $3 trillion you plan to spend. So when the Congress passes a budget resolution, they already know what the deficit is going to be, how much they're going to have to borrow. Good. Once that's done, the government then goes ahead and borrows. Every Thursday morning, there's a meeting here in New York where the government comes in and borrows billions and billions of dollars. It's been doing that every Thursday for years and years and years and years and years. Nothing new or remarkable about this. If you've never been at one of these meetings, it's because you aren't rich. And I'm sorry about that. I feel for you, but let me tell you, that's what rich people down in Wall Street, that's what they do. The Federal Reserve Bank, right down there on Wall Street, that's where this is done. Okay. Now, you'd think it's straightforward. The government goes and borrows. No. A bill was passed, a law was passed years ago by the Congress, not that many years ago, but a bunch, saying the government can't just borrow when the Congress decides to spend more than it takes in taxes. Logical as though that is. No, it has to have another bill go through specifically allowing the government to borrow a certain sum of money. That's called the debt ceiling, the maximum that the government can borrow. So here's what happened. The last time this issue arose, the Congress raised the ceiling to whatever it is now, $16 trillion, whatever it is. And the amount of money, when they passed the budget last fall, for now, involves an amount of borrowing that's more than what that ceiling allows. So the normal thing that they would have to do is that the president comes into the Congress and says, you've got to raise the ceiling so I can borrow the money to spend and tax the way you voted for me to do, which is what the president does. And then the opposition party can have a fun time. It can say, no, we're not gonna. We're not gonna raise the ceiling, which means the government can't borrow the amount of money that the Republicans and Democrats agreed it would have to do what they agreed to spend and tax. So again, the Republicans are saying, we're not going to allow you to do what we voted you'd have to do to fulfill what we voted the government to do. Fight a war in Iraq, fight a war in Afghanistan, pay out Social Security, give money to college students, all the things they do. So here's what the Republicans have said. We're not raising the debt ceiling unless you, and here we go again, get rid of Obamacare and 46 other things that are what they always want. Basically to help those at the top and to hobble the government spending on the grounds that you're borrowing too much. Okay, so yes?
What determines the debt ceiling? Like who...
Congress, they just sit there and they put a number. So for example, the last time they did it, they could have raised it to, say, 20 trillion. If they had raised it at that point, they're completely free to pick any number in the world. They can sit there, throw darts at the wall, use that number, or have a great economist like me come in and suggest something. Makes no difference. It's very important. They're completely free to pick any number they want. Had they picked 20 trillion, we wouldn't be at the ceiling, and this issue wouldn't be here. But they all play this game. They raise it only a little because they want the freedom to manipulate and maneuver next time. By the way, do the Republicans only play this game? No, the Democrats. When the president is a Republican, the Democrats say we won't raise the ceiling. And when the Democrats and the Republicans, this is how they extort from one another the compromises they seek. So the Republicans have said we're not going to raise the debt ceiling on the 17th of October, which means as of the 17th, a week from this coming Thursday, as of the 17th, the government of the United States faces a peculiar situation. It can't borrow, okay? But what does that mean? It means that the money coming in, taxes we all pay, is not enough to fund all of the scheduled outflow. That's what it means if you're spending more than you're earning. And so I turned to a very useful source to be able to give you the numbers. The source is you've heard of them, Goldman Sachs Bank. They're very interested in this. Why? Why is Goldman Sachs? Well, beyond the normal reasons, Goldman Sachs is interested because if the government, and by the way, I'll give you the number, if on the 17th, if we don't make it on the 17th of the thing, the money coming in will be only about 65% of the money going out. In other words, the government literally is not going to have 35 cents of every dollar it's supposed to be spending. Then the great question becomes, and here Goldman gets real interested, then the question becomes, well, what is the government going to take that 65 cents that are still coming in from taxes, that they can spend? They have the right to spend that. They just don't have the right to borrow the other 35 cents. So what are they going to spend the 65 cents on? And what are they not going to spend it on? There the government has a lot of discretion. So for example, the government could say next Thursday, a week from this Thursday, on the 17th, okay, well, we're not having 35 cents out of every dollar we wanted to spend on is not coming in. So it could send an email to every one of the troops in Afghanistan, sitting in a ditch someplace, saying, you're going to not have dinner tonight because we're not spending the money for your food ration. Got to save it someplace. They can't spend the 35 cents they're not allowed to borrow. They can only spend the 65 cents of taxes coming in. So they could say to the soldiers, please try to learn to fight on an empty stomach. Or, we're sorry if you got wounded, you're going to have to die. Well, we're not going to have a field hospital because we're saving. Or here's another one. Dear Social Security recipient, we're very sorry to inform you that the $872 we've been sending you each month is now going to be reduced to $512. Have a really nice day. Could they? Yeah. Sure they could. They could stop a subsidy to Amtrak, no train. They're going to do what is politically most advantageous to squeeze the Republicans and to blame them as best they can, while the Republicans are busy blaming the other side. There is no resolution to this unless and until the two sides come to some agreement. Goldman Sachs is worried. Why? Because there's one kind of government expenditure they care a lot about. Well, they care about it all, but there's one they're really concerned about. Goldman Sachs, like every bank, major bank in the world, owns a huge amount of U.S. government bonds. They have lent money to the American government for years, and in their vaults are all these debts of the United States. But if the United States can't borrow any more money, and it hasn't got 35 cents of every dollar it owes, part of the dollar the government owes is the interest and repayment of the debts that it's obligated to pay. So there's a chance it could say to all the creditors like Goldman Sachs, we're not paying you for the indefinite future. Have a really nice collapse, which is what they would need. The banks don't have enough to cover this. So we're talking about That's why last week, some of you may have noticed, that all the biggest banks send their executives to a big conference at the Treasury in Washington to talk with Mr. Liu and the others that are at the top of this. I'm sure Mr. Obama was there too, or his top lieutenants were. They don't want this. And when you hear the government might default, now you should understand. It only might, because if the government decides we don't want to default, they'll take the 65 cents and take care of the creditors. Then there'll be no default. We don't have to default. We can use the 65 cents taxes coming in and just take care of the debts. But the problem, as Goldman Sachs points out, is if that were done, the GDP of the United States, because if they paid back all the creditors, they would have to cut drastically on everything else they spend on because they haven't touched the creditors, which would mean what? A headline. Big banks, big picture of a banker smiling, we're getting paid by the government, and all the people on food stamps eating cat food because there ain't no money for that. You can't do both. And that's politically impossible. Even the American people cannot watch the biggest bankers get paid by the government while everybody else is told, sorry. How are you going to handle the old people of America if their Social Security checks are cut while you take care of all the creditors? All the gobbledygook in the world won't wash it, won't cover it. They all know that. And they're scared and they don't know what to do. They really are. Many of them think it is so outrageous, the level of difficulty that they could get into, that they're not worried. They keep reassuring each other. I read the financial press, I can assure you, they keep reassuring each other, oh, it will never come to that. They won't let this happen. They won't, they won't, they won't. But here's the problem with that argument. We're not in normal times. We're not like we have been. This is the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. It's the worst in everyone's lifetime here, in this room. And there's no end in sight. You're playing with a very thin layer of ice that you're skating around on, and no one quite knows why is it getting so bad. And so now let me switch gears in answering that question to tell you something that's true about capitalism everywhere in the world, which is part of the way I go at this material, as you've probably noticed. When the capitalist system can't function, this is what happened in the Great Depression, and that's what's happening now. The normal politics becomes intolerable to growing numbers of people. After all, it's the normal. The Republicans and the Democrats, they do their thing, you vote for one, and then you vote for the other one, and then when you're disgusted with the one, you vote for the other one, and pretty soon you're disgusted with the other one, and then you vote for that, and everybody keeps doing it, and nobody gets more angry than, oh, I'll throw out the guy who's in, and I'll bring in the guy who's out. But what happens when the thing gets so bad that everyone is plague on both your houses? Then you begin to see the middle drop out. The normal, everyday politics becomes unbearable to people. It is happening everywhere. In Greece, I think I told you last month about the way politics, because it's worse there than anywhere. In Greece, the politics are becoming very extreme. The two big parties, the equivalent in Greece of the Democratic and Republican parties, the Syriza and the New Democracy. They used to together get 2/3, 3/4 of the vote. Now they can only get together less than 1/3 of the vote because the people have no confidence in them. The people
not Syriza, not Syriza. PASOK.
I'm sorry, yes, absolutely. PASOK, the old Socialist Party. The New Democracy and PASOK, they exchanged and they had coalitions and all that. So people don't want them anymore. They go further left to the Syriza or further right to the Golden Dawn Party, quasi-fascistic right-wing party that beats up on immigrants, and you read about that. But you have it everywhere. I tried to give you, I can't remember whether we did or not, the German elections, the result of the German elections on the 22nd of September were very, very interesting. You all read, unfortunately because of the newspapers here, you all read account of the German election which took place on Sunday, September 22nd. And the headline you read, Angela Merkel reelected. Okay, now let me give you the results. Angela Merkel got 40% of the vote. The majority of Germans who voted did not vote for her. And if you count the Germans who were eligible but didn't vote at all, then she was reelected by about a quarter of the people of Germany. That's who came out to vote for their great universal leader. Not. Okay, number one. Number two, she's got a whole new political problem. She governed as a part of a coalition, because the way German politics and most European politics works, if your party gets less than 50%, you have to make a coalition with another party that together you have the majority of more than 50% so you can govern. So she governed with what we would call here a conservative or even libertarian party. The Free Democratic Party, which didn't want government intervention, which was a kind of right-wing Milton Friedman sort of party. That party collapsed. They didn't even get 5% of the vote. They're not in the parliament. In German politics, if you don't get 5% of the popular vote, you get no seats in parliament. If you get more than 5%, you get the same number of seats in the parliament as your percentage of the popular vote. So Mrs. Merkel got a small percentage of the German people to vote for her and lost her ability to govern because her partner is gone. So she has to find a new partner. And she doesn't know where to turn. She could make a partnership with the Greens, but they didn't do real well. They came in fourth. Fourth. Well, who came in second and third? Really? Second was the Socialist Party, 25% of the vote. And third was the German equivalent of Syriza, the Die Linke Party, a party one of whose slogans is, Germany can do better than capitalism. Uh-oh. 8.6% of the vote. More than 1 out of 12 Germans has that perspective. She's not going to ally with them. The Greens won't be enough. She may have to end up allying with the socialists, what's called a grand coalition. It's the two biggest parties. But the last time they did that, the Socialist Party lost 30–40% of its voters who became the Left Party, who left because they were more left. This is a disaster in Germany for the government. This is a split economy. But if you read the New York Times, Angela Merkel wins it. Whoa, you know, what? I travel around the United States. I explain to people, for example, that in France, you know, where French fries come from, France, the president is a socialist. The socialists have a majority in the Assemblée Nationale, the lower house, and the socialists have a majority in the Senate. That's called a trifecta. The socialists run everything. It's a socialist government. They just passed a law, just to give you an idea, they passed a law which said that no French company with more than 1,000 employees can be sold to any other company without an okay from the workers' councils that exist in every factory. You have to go to the workers, tell them what you're planning to do, give them the right to name an accountant who looks at your books and determines whether you've accepted properly any offers to buy. Oh, wow. There's a level of power that an American union working people can hardly imagine. But that's one of the benefits of a socialist government. So things are pulling apart. They're becoming more extreme. And that's what's happening in the United States, too. That's why the Tea Party is getting support and able to push this issue.
But we don't have the opposite here. We don't have a socialist or communist party.
Not yet. But we did have the first spurt of it, right? We had Occupy Wall Street coming out of nowhere and saying suddenly, hey, by the way, genius what they did, right? Before we had these statistics, they said, it's the 1% and the 99%. This is about a good summary. Geniuses. No, really. They hit upon a slogan that these 35 years taught the American people to find reasonable, as they did with Occupy. So yes, we don't have the organizations. We don't have the organizations. We're weak. We don't have strong unions. The Europeans do. We don't have strong socialist parties. The Europeans do. We don't have strong communist and left parties. The Europeans do.
Class consciousness.
And the class consciousness, well, I'm not so sure about that. Let me interrupt myself, even though I wasn't going to do this. I've done it before, but I can see I needed to do it again. Why? Big question, right? Why does the United States lag Europe, for example, in trade union strength, socialist strength, communist? Why are we so disorganized compared to them? You know, it's a stunning question. In Europe, everybody wonders, what's the matter with the Americans? What happened to them? Do they eat badly? Well, in France, that's half the explanation. They eat hamburgers. What do you expect? Kind of, you know, what is that? But it's actually remarkable because the Europeans are in the streets fighting austerity, but they suffer much less than we do from it. So they fight harder while hurting less. Every European country has a national health service. You lose your job, it has no impact on your health care. It's not like the United States. France has had for the last 30 years 5 weeks paid vacation. It's the law. Nobody has touched it. Even the conservatives, they don't say boo. They'd be voted out in 10 minutes if they did. My counterpart, a professor in the middle of Paris, sends his 8-year-old daughter to the daycare in his area maintained by the city of Paris. She can go as early as 7 in the morning and stay as late as 7 in the evening. She can go for an hour, the whole day. If she's there at mealtime, she's fed. Cost per week, 17 euros, $25. What does it cost to go to university in Paris? $800 a year for everything. You understand? That's a society in which services are provided on a mass basis, and they have those. They have those right now in the midst of their economic, they're very upset. They have horrible levels of unemployment, very serious problem. But their social services is what they fought for with the unions and the socialists and the communists. So what is the answer? Americans are not active, and yet they're being hurt more. The Europeans are in the streets with general strikes, and they're not being hurt so bad. Well, what is it? Let me try to give you an answer, which I've done before, but I can see this has to be worked at to be understood. The left in the United States was smashed. And it was smashed in a particular way that turns out to have been extremely effective. And that has to be understood. And here's the short version of this. The last time capitalism collapsed in the United States was the Great Depression. Many more people were unemployed. The suffering was terrible. You know, read The Grapes of Wrath, you remember, and Dreiser, and all of the literature and the history. People really living in boxcars and all of that. But the reaction of the American people was completely different. Number one, a new organization arose early in the crisis called the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. And they went to the American working class and they said, okay, capitalism is falling apart. Your best hope to get through this is to join a union. Millions of Americans who had never been in a union before, had no idea really what it was, joined a union. The greatest organizing drive American history had ever seen. We never had anything like it before, and we've never had anything like it since. Wow. And who helped that happen? Two socialist parties, one Trotskyite, one regular socialist, and a communist party, who worked with the CIO very closely, even though they had arguments and disagreements. They worked very closely and helped build that organizing drive. Millions of people were therefore in a socialist, communist, union coalition. And they went to Roosevelt. They really did. Sidney Hillman and the big leaders went to Roosevelt and they said, hey, you got to do something for the mass of people. You got to. And we'll tell you why. Because our union people are very hurting and they're very angry. And if you don't do something, they're going to listen to the other people working with us, these socialists and these communists, and they are gearing up to do here what they did over there in Russia. You don't want that, do you? And Roosevelt, being a clever politician, said, wait a minute, give me a few hours, I'll get back to you. He immediately called, I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but condensing the history. He calls a meeting of the rich and the corporations, and he says to them, my dear friends, he's one of them after all, my dear friends, I just had a scary meeting, and here's what they told me. I got to do this, or else the game is up. It's over. You better give me a lot of money to take care of these people, and it's in your interest to give me a lot of money, because if you don't, you're going to have no money at all. They're going to take it away from you. And you're not going to live in that house, and you're not going to have that car, and. And he split the corporate leadership and the rich in America right down the middle. Half of them he never convinced. They thought they could get through it, knock a few heads with the police, they'll take care of it. The other half were scared to death. And that was all Roosevelt needed. So he got a coalition. He got the unions, the communists, and the socialists to celebrate Roosevelt like he was the second coming. They did. Some of you know, right? Talk to your parents or grandparents. Roosevelt walks on water. Roosevelt is, you know, he's just. And, you know, the American people loved it. Roosevelt said, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to tax rich people like you never saw. And he did. And I'm going to tax corporations. You're going to give me the money. And I'm going to use it to create Social Security, 1934, to create unemployment insurance for the first time, and to hire 15 million unemployed people to build the national parks, which are now closed. Right? That's what they did, among other things. Staggering. Help the bottom. Hire the unemployed. Give money to the unemployed. There were millions of them. And say to everybody over age 65, we're going to give you a check every month for the rest of your life. At a time when there was no money, like it is today. There's no money, there's no money. Ooh, he found the money. Turns out there was all the money he needed. He just had to tax the rich and the corporations. And I know some of you are looking at me and don't quite believe this story. So let me give you a couple little details that sometimes help you to understand. The State of the Union message, 1944. Roosevelt proposes a new tax at the highest level of income. The rate of taxation at the highest level will be 100%. You heard me right. I didn't make a mistake. 100%. Here's what it meant. Everybody who earned over $25,000 a year at that time would be about $380,000 a year now. $25,000. The proposal of the president sent to Congress was every dollar over $25,000 a year, you would have to pay the government 100% of it. Do you understand? That's a maximum income. Nobody would get over $25,000 a year. And if you got more, you wouldn't get it. You'd have to give it to the government. Wow. That would raise a lot of money, which he could use for Social Security, unemployment compensation, and hiring unemployed people. That's called taking it from the rich and giving it to the poor. Robin Hood and all that. When they got the message, Republicans went bananas like Republicans do. I can't do that. Social, and when all the dust cleared, they made a compromise, which the Republicans and the Democrats both endorsed. The top income tax bracket in 1944 was 94%. Every dollar over $25,000 that a rich man or woman got, they gave Uncle Sam 94 cents. They got to keep 6. What is the top rate today? The highest rate that an American pays? 39.6%. That's a tax cut of stupefying proportions. That's what happened over the last 50 years. The rich got the taxes reduced on them. And I'm going to come back to that. If not today, then next month. So, let's see. A president taxed the rich and helped the mass of middle and low income. He didn't just say it, that we're used to that. He did it. And the rich people in America could not believe it. We're being overwhelmed by socialism. They might not have been able to spell it, but they knew what it meant. And as if to prove that their anxiety was correct, no sooner was the Depression over than we were in a war where our chief ally was Stalin. Oh my God, the Russians, we're with the Russians, the communists. 1945, the wealthy in America and the rich, they understood one really good lesson. And this is important to understand because the left didn't get it. They did, though. They knew they had come very close in those 15 years of depression and war to losing their control of this society, which they had had since we became a nation. That was the closest they got. The president who did this to them, whom they hated, had been rewarded by being the most popular president in the history of the country. The man was reelected 4 times. No president had ever been reelected 4 times. When he died in 1945, the first thing the Republicans did, pass a law that nobody can be president more than twice. They didn't want this again. They didn't want this. So a president who taxes the rich and gives to the poor is not only not taking a political chance, he's doing the opposite, which makes you wonder about the current president and what's in his mind. Why is he so afraid? Why is he so afraid? Of what? I read in the newspaper he's worried about his legacy. Well, he should be. But here's an alternative. The last Democrat in a situation like his made a very different decision. But the right wing in the government and the corporations, they asked themselves the important question. They asked themselves, what made Roosevelt do this? Roosevelt was another politician like all the others. By the way, he came into office in his first election for a balanced budget. He wasn't a liberal or a radical or anything like it. What changed him? They knew. They knew it was the pressure from below. It was the CIO and the socialists and the communists and so they understood what had to be done to make sure this didn't happen in America again. What had to be done is you had to here we come, my answer to the question, to destroy the left, destroy the communists, destroy the socialists, destroy the labor movement. And the last 50 years, that's the plan. And that's what both parties did, some more faster, some slower, some cruder, some more sophisticated, but it's been the program. You begin by making the communists not a political party with an attitude, but the agents of a foreign power that are subverting, you rev up everybody's head, and so you get rid of that. Step 2, you explain to everybody that the socialists is a different way of spelling communist. It's, by the way, as a teacher in America, all my 50 years, I've always been amazed. My students think that the following words are synonyms: communist, socialist, Marxist, anarchist, and now Muslim. It's all the same. Well, but that's not ignorance. That's a way of growing up in which you had a sequence. If we were in the southern part of the United States, got to be careful where this video goes, but if we were in the southern part of the United States, you might add, black person, and so you have some more demons, devils, things that are scary. But that comes out of our history. We made the socialists into communists so we could subject them to the same witch hunts that worked so well with the communists. And when we got rid of the Communist Party and the 2 socialist parties, those parties do exist in the United States, but they're tiny and have virtually no political influence, anything like what they once had. And then we went to work on the trade union movement, which is a study in disaster for the last 50 years. Every year weaker than the year before for 50 years. They did it brilliantly. They made clear to the American population, don't get near anything leftist. Don't get involved in an organization that mumbles about wealth and power. Even in the 60s and 70s, we had a civil rights movement, we had a women's liberation movement, we had an ecological movement. If you were involved in those, you know, you were at meetings where someone came in and said, you know, we ought to put this together with an economic Don't do that. That will weaken our movement. The cops will come and get us and we'll be in trouble. No, let's just stay with the civil rights, or stay with the women's equality, or keep that away. People were terrified. Young people didn't understand why, but they had an aversion to organizations with a leftist aroma around them. That has to be taught to people. And that was taught to the American people. They tried that in Europe, and it didn't work. There was too much opposition. Partly in Europe, it had to do with the resistance to the Nazis and so forth, having been led by people who then became heroes. They were the communists and the socialists and the unions who were the backbone of what organization there was. You couldn't demonize them. You just couldn't. I mean, my family's European, and I remember my French family telling me that you could never hate a communist because Aunt Louise was one of them. And at the picnic, she made the best chicken. And it's very hard to hate a communist who makes really good chicken and who is the aunt who helped you when you were sick. I mean, you can't do it. You can't do what we did here. This was a really powerful, ideological, political, police operation. And that's why we have a weak organized left. And that's why Occupy is so important, because it had the nerve and the courage and the daring to go against that rule, to put the economics right up front, and it didn't destroy them. On the contrary, it made them popular. It drew people to, it's extraordinary. It is a breakthrough of enormous importance, and that has nothing to do with how organized and how many of them are active today. They broke through taboos that were 50 years in the making in this society.
Was race also a factor in America for
Always.
keeping black and
Always. Always. Black people have for a very long time been fundamentally more willing to be critical of a system because it gave them the short end of the stick. I mean, you don't need an advanced degree. And so the left-wing organizations went to the black community and found more of an audience and responded, as you might expect, to that. And the American political thing realized, uh-oh, we've got a part of our population that we treat in such a way that they become open to the, we got to deal with that. We got to deal with that. And they've tried to. We have that in the White House. One result. You have to find those black people who will be standouts for not fundamental change, for gradual change, for gradual adjustment, all of that. But yeah, the race issue, keeping people apart, all the things that you all know, of course are part of it. Of course are part of it. Demonizing intellectuals. So many of the revolutionaries in the 30s were students and college teachers. So you needed to develop in America the notion of the academic has got his head in the clouds. The academic doesn't really understand. The academic is kind of phony. It's a bizarre anti-intellectualism that militates against. If you're a student, there's something kind of wrong with you. All my life, I've been active with other academics. I've been a professor all my life. So I've been a student, I've been a professor. And I've always noticed it's very peculiar in the United States. My fellow academics are constantly apologizing for being academic. We're not really an activist like you. You're active all the time. You go to every faculty meeting. You go to every faculty union. What is it? How come you're not an What? No, but they don't really count. This notion that the academic is a stranger, a foreigner, a distant, a what is this? This is a way of separating average people from the thinking, very dangerous for the left. The left needs people who think about what's going on, not because they can find all the answers, but because you need that as part of a vibrant movement. If you make people who are not inclined to intellectual thinking and reading skeptical in principle from those who are, you're driving another wedge, like the wedge between a white person and a non-white person, or one between an educated or not, or a Native American or an immigrant. All those ways, everything was used. That's why the American system is as screwed up. And it's so hard for the left to reorganize and regroup itself. But don't think that's because there's something peculiar about Americans. It really isn't the hamburger. It's our particular history. We had a number done on us. You know, it's funny. We want to say to the women, you've really suffered. You've been second-class citizens. You haven't been given a fair shot. So we understand why you're angry and want equality for women or for African Americans. But we somehow don't want to say it for us as a working class and as a left. We got really wrecked, really whacked. Some of you are doing research on Lisa here, on the Smith Act and on some of you know these stories back in the 50s and 60s when communists were deported. After living in this country 20, 30, 40 years, were sent back to Romania or wherever, or arrested, or killed. I mean, this is serious stuff. People who tried to make change were really hunted down, and the whole culture was treated like that. I remember, to tell you all this, I remember when I was in a kindergarten in New Rochelle, New York, not very far from here, where I was living at the time. I was learning, my parents were horrified, because my parents are Europeans, and they lived through bombing, they know what war is. So I came home one day and I explained to them how the teacher had explained to us what we would have to do in the event of a nuclear attack. And we were to crawl under our little wooden desks, put our hands over our heads, scared the daylights out of us. And you can imagine, of course, the enormous protection you'd have from a nuclear attack by being under a wooden desk with your hand over here. You know, the lunacy of the country, but it was clear. And my parents were horrified because how upset I was about something I couldn't possibly understand other than an awful that could happen to us at any time. All of that has to be factored into the job that was done. Right? We take it seriously. We say people who suffered the Holocaust are understood to have psychological problems, or soldiers that come back from the war have PTSD and all of it. But the left in America went through an extraordinary experience, unlike what happened in most other countries. It wasn't, you know, in Germany you got killed, and that ended the story. So I'm not saying it was the worst, but it was a very severe treatment and explains why we have. The irony is that in Germany, where literally people were hunted down, killed in gas chambers, there's a strong and vibrant left. What was done here was a much more profound negation of the left. Didn't require putting people in gas chambers. But its effects in the long run may in fact be greater. Okay, we've run out of time. Let me just finish for today. My guess is that we're going to either have no debt ceiling, that a deal will be made at the end. That's probably what's going to happen because too many of the people who call the shots in the United States don't want it. I wouldn't say, though, it's 100%, not even close. I think there's a good chance we will, in fact, have a debt ceiling impasse of the sort that some folks are worried about. And then all that's going to happen, which is what's already happening, is a daily calculation. I have students who work in Washington, so I know what I'm talking about. It's not secondhand. Both parties are doing every day, constant, 24-hour-a-day polling with focus groups all around the country, asking each one, day by day, how are they reacting to the news? And the purpose of this polling is to determine one thing. Are the majority of people blaming Obama and the Democrats, or are the majority of people blaming Republicans, Boehner, etc.? And the parties are trying to figure out how to handle this popular reaction and the separate polling of their base, the people who vote in primaries, the people they have to face first in their election. That's what they're doing. It's a peculiar example of the United States in which the philosophy, take care of number one, means that you have a Congress full of people who are taking care of number one. trying to figure out how to stay alive, stay in that job, keep that job, not be squeezed out by somebody on the left or somebody on the right, and they're going to do whatever the outcome is, and they don't know, and they don't care. They're taking care of, everybody is taking care of number one. Just like the top 0.01%. Top 0.01%, they're taking care of number one. They're doing a damn good job. But they're worried. So let me tell you a story about myself without mentioning any names. Three or 4 weeks ago, I was called, to my surprise, by a hedge fund here in New York. I had never heard of it before, and so I did, as all good Americans do, rushed to the Google and typed in the name of this thing that had sent me an email, anonymous to me. I mean, a person's name was there, but I didn't know anything about it. And I learned that this is a hedge fund that manages $45 billion, which is a lot of money. And while there are hedge funds much bigger, that's a big hedge fund. That's bigger than a lot of them. There are thousands of hedge funds, but this is a good one, $45 billion. Would I come with an associate of mine, would I come and talk to them, their leadership, in their headquarters in Times Square? Okay? This was interesting. I had never before been invited by a hedge fund to talk to them. I've met some of those people, but I hadn't done that before. So I went. And I went up to the top of a very, very tall building in a beautiful room made entirely of glass so that we could sit there having our lunch, looking from the Hudson River on the west to the East River on the east, and the Central Park, and I don't know, Idaho, whatever you can see from all of this. For me, everything west of the Hudson is Idaho. It isn't real. I was born in Ohio, so I'm not a native New Yorker. I'm a Midwesterner, which you can tell from the way I speak. Anyway, the lunch was interesting, and here's the man came in who's clearly in charge. The way we knew he was in charge is he entered the room first and was followed, I didn't make this up, I couldn't, by 20 people. Each one had a pad and a pencil. They sat around the big conference table and began, before I began speaking, taking notes. And that's what they did. They didn't say a word. They just took notes all the time. The honcho, he spoke. Very well spoken, very erudite. And here's what he told me. He said, you know, we are a very big hedge fund. We do really well. Our job is to take the money of the wealthy people who give it to us and to do better for them than they could do for themselves, to do better than they could do by just investing in stocks. We have the special deals, we have the inside track, which is what hedge funds do, basically. And we do all that, and we're very proud, but we're worried. So I figure, oh, well, this is where I come in, he's worried. And here's what we're worried about. We don't think what's going on in the world economy is sustainable. That's what he said. My first thought, because I'm an American on the left, when I hear the word sustainable, the next word is always green. It's something environmental. He could care less about that. That's not what he meant. What he meant was the level of inequality developing in this society, he said, is not sustainable. And he is very worried that they are going to have to now rethink their asset, I'll use the language that they use, and some of you know this, I'll explain it if you don't. They're going to have to rethink their regional asset allocation program. Translate into English. Where are we going to invest our money? And what he was saying to me became very clear. They are going to reduce their exposure to Western Europe, the United States, and Japan. Because what's going on there is not sustainable. Translation, it's going to blow. It's going to blow up. This is scary, and we have to rethink where we're investing our clients' money because it's too dangerous even if it's profitable here in the United States, that's the wrong calculus. It's profitable, but it's not sustainably profitable. We would be better off taking a lower profit in a safer part of the world than stay. Now, let me tell you why that's crucial. By the way, he then said, just so you understand, we have, of course, our own economists. And then he mentioned to one corner of the room where people with real anxious looks on their faces were sitting. If you understand the game, the way these things are played, you know why. Because they have to be anxious, since if they're such good economists, why am I there? They have their own people. So he's careful, he strokes them. They're very good, he says. Nobody's fooled by this. They're very good. But we would like to have, you know, he said, giggling, a second opinion. Like it was his appendix we were dealing with. Right? So I gave him the second opinion, which basically ran, you think it's bad? It's much worse. Right? Which he wanted to hear. He knew I would say that. He wanted that. He threw a lot of questions, fast, all kinds of questions. He wanted to study this kind of statistics. He wanted to talk about this. All of that. Not these exact numbers, but comparable numbers. And as the conversation went on, it became clear to me that there's a real lesson here, and I'm going to close with that today. Over the last 50 years, something that has been very important to helping the American economy is turning against us. Here's what it was. Everywhere in the world, a government, a rich corporation, a wealthy individual, a criminal, they all knew that the safest place to put your money was here. For example, New York City, talk to any of the major realtors, Elliman, Brown Harris Stevens, any of them, and they will tell you that 30, 40, 50% of the high-priced apartments on Fifth Avenue and everywhere else are sold to and owned by foreigners who are never in there. You walk by many of these apartments at night, nothing's lit up. It's like, you know, they have a brownout here or something? No. These are not apartments to be lived in. These are investments of people who want to make their money go out of Burundi or Malaysia or Paraguay because it's too dangerous there. And you need to keep a good part of your money here. Invest in stocks, invest in real estate, buy Pebble Beach golf units out in California or whatever. And that money has been flowing in, billions every year, supporting the American economy, bringing wealth here, bringing money to be invested, building up the prices of property because they're part of the bidders for it. Now ask yourself the question, given what that hedge fund man was saying, which presumably is being said by all hedge funds all over the world, nobody is going to be bringing more money here. Everybody is going to be taken out. Not all at once, not everything. You know, 1% less, 3% less. That's what he's talking about. But we've never had that before. To every other problem we have as a nation, we now have people turning back and they look at this impasse in the government and they say, oh boy, another sign that this is spinning out of control. That the gap between the parties is unbridgeable, that the left and the right are becoming, just like in all the other countries, it's taken this American form. But the difference is, we're the country that everybody thought was safe by definition, was the securest capitalist country on the earth, that nothing could question property rights, and if you're not dumb, you see that dissolving here. And the impact on this country is extremely profound. And Goldman Sachs knows it too. And they're struggling, Goldman is, between making an all-out push to put the lid back on here, or joining the exodus. And in fact, they're doing both.
Where else is the money going?
What?
Where else is the money going?
Wherever they can park it, and they don't expect to be able to park it for a long time. It's not that the rest of the world is wonderful and safe, not at all. It's just that the relationship between the United States and those other places, the comparison, is not what it once was. It once was, of course you wouldn't put it in Brazil. You put it here. Now you put some in Brazil. Of course you wouldn't put it in post-communist Russia, Putin. Now you do. Now you do. Of course you wouldn't put it in China. Now you do. Of course you wouldn't put it in India. Now you do. Not because those societies are stable. They're not. Not because they aren't dangerous. They are. But the gap between them and the United States is shrinking. And so the adjustments get made. And no one is bringing more money here. The only question is how much less and how soon. And that is a very serious threat to the ability of the United States to hold on to whatever it was that was better here than in the rest of the world. Bottom line, which is what I said to you last month, and I'm going to say it to you again this time. Even though we went a different way to get at the conclusion, it's the same conclusion. We all live at a turning point in American and Western European and Japanese capitalism. Capitalism grew strong in these three parts of the world. Began in England, spread to Europe, came to the United States, spread to Japan. These were the capitalist centers in the first 100 to 200 years, depending on where you're looking. Capitalism grew, capitalism made a lot of money, capitalism plowed that money back in. And it made the rest of the world the hinterland, the part of the world that sent the people, the immigrants, to work in the city, the part of the world that sent the raw materials and the food, and the part of the world that bought some of the output that capitalists were busy making. And in the course of that development, the rest of the world became, for those of you with biblical interests, the hewers of wood and the drawers of water. They provided the conditions for a successful capitalism. Capitalism didn't have to take care of them, and it didn't. Their wages fell, their standards of living fell. I'm talking Asia, Africa, Latin America, all of that. But in the center where capitalism was thriving, it had to come to terms with its working class, because the working class protested against the horrible living conditions, the housing conditions, the wages. So a deal was made, a fundamental deal between the capitalists and the mass of the working class. You don't overthrow us, we'll give you a rising standard of living. We're making enough money, we're building ourselves up, we're becoming, well, we can give you a bit. And so over 200 years, the wages in Western Europe, North America, and Japan rose relative to those in the rest of the world. By the 1970s, we all had what most of you have taken for granted in your life, that this is the part of the world where people have a house and a car and a fridge and all the rest, and the rest of the world is where they don't. The rest of the world is what's in the pages of National Geographic, and that's on your coffee table. Because you have a nice coffee table, because you have a coffee machine and a TV and all the rest, and you like to have one of those magazines that reminds you how much better off you are than all of those people. In the 1970s, all of that changed. The American capitalists discovered that their own development now gave them a reason to change location. Why stay in the parts of the world where the wages had to be paid up? Because during the same period that they raised those wages, they created a vast, unpaid, low-paid, desperate population for work. And with modern jet engines to move you around the planet quickly, and with modern telecommunications that made it possible to monitor, to command and control a factory 10,000 miles away, just as easily as you used to do it with a factory 10 miles away, capitalists figured it out. We're leaving, they said to us, even though we couldn't hear it. Bye-bye. It was really nice being here. It was great for the 200 years we built a capitalist world, but we can make one hell of a lot more money going to China, India, Nigeria, Brazil, and all those other places. We don't need you. Those people will be desperate to work for us for a fraction of what we pay you. Our profits can go mad. Way better than anything we've done. We're not staying here. Bye-bye. We're gone. That's why we have Detroit and Cleveland and Camden, New Jersey, and. Those are the places where it's stark, where the capitalists got up and said, see you later. We're out of here. We have no responsibility. You may have worked for generations for us. You may have paid the taxes that led the community, Detroit, Michigan, to give us one subsidy after another, to build the roads over here and the railroads over here, to do everything we need. You may have contributed to us, but when it's more profitable to us under the rules of capitalism, bye-bye. We're gone. And here's the political point. For 200 years, the working classes of Western Europe, North America, and Japan consoled themselves about what was happening to them on the job by saying, okay, we don't control what happens to us. We do what we're told. We make what somebody else tells us to make. We use whatever technology they tell us to use. We produce or not, depending on whether they locate the job here where I live or I don't. And whatever profits we help to produce, they decide what to do with them. We have no democracy. We have no say. We are mice. But it's okay because our standard of living is, our wages are rising and we're getting a better life. And maybe that's the way life is. You work your ass off and you get to go to the mall. That's the payoff. You don't have any say, you have no rights. You really are a peon on the job, but boy, can you buy a lot of stuff. What do you do to a population like ours? After 200 years of that being the rule, when capitalism, the same capitalism that cut that deal with you, now says to you, I got this news for you, Americans, Europeans, Japanese. We're leaving. Rising wages is something that's going to happen in Bangladesh from now on. For you, you're going down. There's no offset of rising wages. You're not even going to get the wages for the next generation that you got for this one. You're the first generation of young people in the room who are going to have debts up to here with a job prospect. You'll never pay it back. You know that. That's why the default rate of student debt in this country is beyond any kind of debt we've seen in this country's history. 10% of people are not paying back. And that's the ones who admit it. So we've got a capitalism that's offering Americans and the working class of Western Europe, North America, and Japan a new deal. We are going to rip you off on the job and we're going to cut your salary while we're doing it. Have a really nice day. And the question is really, 100% is this the question? Will the American, European, and Japanese working classes who accepted a capitalism, however uncomfortably, because it gave them a rising standard of living, how are they going to feel about a capitalism when it doesn't give them that compensation anymore? When it says to them, your future sucks. The good jobs are gone. You can aspire to being a barista at Starbucks. What happens then? No one knows the answer to that question. The question for the left is, can it see it? And can it take advantage of it? And make that the issue. If it can, this country is going to go in a very different direction, and we are going to be in what philosophers call interesting times. Which one said once, beware interesting times. On the other hand, if we don't, then we will quietly go into the kind of backwater and the kind of desperation that you can already see in this country if you drive through Detroit or Cleveland or Youngstown or Camden or many, many other American cities that are hollowed out. One statistic on Detroit. In 1960, the population of Detroit, officially counted, just under 2 million people. It was the center of the automobile industry, and it was the most vibrant industry in America, the automobile industry. Today, the population of Detroit is under 700,000 people. The majority of the people of Detroit were driven out of their home. They were scattered. Their jobs were gone. Their neighborhoods were unlivable. They broke apart their families. They yanked their kids out of the schools at times that are very bad for young children to be yanked out of the school. And many of them went to other cities where the same thing happened to them again. Now, Americans may want to believe, it's peculiar to Detroit. Or they may want to racialize it and think it has to do with black people. Neither of those is the case. This is the process that started in the 1970s and shows no end. If you watch what the Obama administration is doing, which is just like what the Bush administration did, cutting one agreement with one country after another to facilitate all this, to make it easier for corporations to go abroad, to make it easier for them to bring back into the United States what they're now producing with cheap labor over there rather than the labor here. There's a central shift in American capitalism and European capitalism. Nor is it going to be an easy time in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They're experiencing there the same trauma that capitalism in its early years did here. The novels written about capitalism in Western Europe and North America, Charles Dickens, Emile Zola, Maxim Gorky, the great literature of the explosion of capital labor strife. That's what we read in Bangladesh when 1,000 people and the building collapses. The march in Bangladesh 3 weeks ago, when 200,000 workers marched through the street of Dhaka demanding a minimum wage of $100 a month. I'll do that again. A minimum wage of $100. Why? Because their current minimum wage is $38 a month. They're going to have explosive conflicts there that are different because they have a different culture and a different history from what we have. But violent capitalism is in for a rough time. Rough where it's going because of what all that means, and rough where it's leaving, which is us, because we're going to be angry and upset. That's what's building in Europe, Japan, and here. The forms are different. But this is a very key moment in the history of capitalism. So part of our meetings here are about charting that, noting the moments, keeping a sense of the process. Shoot.
So do you think a society without economy is possible? Like, exponential growth in economy is not possible because we have limited resources, right? So then we need to somehow, like, think of a way to create a society that's centered around the culture rather than economy. Do you think such a thing is possible?
Yeah, but that's the old dream of socialism and communism. The old dream is for workers to say, for a population to say, okay, we're working in this factory. And our way of working is we have a board of directors and shareholders who make all the decisions, and then we work real hard. But here's an idea. Let's suppose we organize the production in a completely different way. We all together decide what to produce and how to produce it. We do it cooperatively, communally, socially, communistically, whatever word you want. And we give each other a chance to speak and to make their desires known for what the work experience should be like. And then quickly someone will raise their hand, even someone in this room. Say, but you know, you can't run a factory like that. You won't be able to produce as many widgets as you would if you had to. And then your answer is, yeah, we'll have less widgets. But we'll have a completely different way of living. And maybe we would have a society in which a debate and a vote could be held. Which do we want? A society in which the relationships we have at work, where we spend most of our adult lives at work, 5 days out of 7, 9 to 5, you know, figure it out. Maybe the relationships we have, the kind of person I can be, the skills and capabilities I have that I can bring to bear and develop, that maybe that's more important than the number of widgets. Maybe we'll do with less to have the society we want. Maybe then we'll actually take some account of the ecological question by saying we don't need to despoil the world. And we may be better off. That was, Marx talked about these things. This is not, may strike you as a new idea, but it isn't all that new. It's a question of how you organize the process to make that real. And if we don't do that, then it just becomes the airy dreaming, the stuff of seminar rooms at the university, where we talk about, gee, there's limited resources and we shouldn't pollute. And in the long run, we'll be very sorry. And people nod because they understand, and then you take your next class because you don't know how to concretize, operational, build it in to an economic system. But we should have been doing this all along. We should have been asking all along, what about the decisions of our workplace and their impact on the rest of our lives? Then we would have long ago thought, let's see, maybe it isn't good to be working 84 hours a week. Maybe we would be better off with less output for all of us in some fair way and do less work. Here's a little statistic for you. Every major European country, with very few exceptions, does about 20% less paid hours of work a year than Americans. Do you understand? 1 out of 5 days less. So when you travel to France and Italy and have one of those 5-hour dinners with wine and it's really, and you finish it, stagger back to your hotel and comment to yourself, what a wonderful culture this is. This is not about culture. This is about a decision they made that they want that kind of life and they don't want to work themselves to death. We don't know if the American people want it because there's no mechanism in this society to allow that to be discussed, debated, and decided in a democratic way. So we allow companies to drive us with advertisements, drive us with jobs, and make us behave in the crazy way that we do. Yeah. Okay. Folks, I want to thank you very much. We've exhausted our time here. You've been here 2 hours.